Awesome. Ben, thanks so much for coming on, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And the first question we typically like to ask is something to do with your early chapters, something to give us a context into who you were growing up. And a question I like to ask recently is, if you were to die today and you had to write a book, what would the title of the book be?
Good question. I'd say maybe Go Exploring or something like that.
Interesting.
I see life as kind of an adventure I like adventuring and I like exploring.
Okay, and then if we were to then open that book of Go Exploring, what would I see in your earlier days growing up in Calgary, I'm assuming?
So I actually grew up in Rocky Mount House. It's kind of a small rural community in central Alberta.
Oh.
So yeah, that was a big part of my upbringing. I grew up, I lived in the country, but I wasn't a farmer. But I kind of went to a local community farming school. So I was never a farm kid. But then I played hockey in Rocky Mountain House, the local town. And I wasn't a town kid either. I was kind of in the middle between them. And so I grew up without any context in business at all. My mom was a school teacher. My dad worked for Fish and Wildlife. So we grew up like camping, hunting, fishing, being in nature, hiking. That was a lot of my upbringing.
In terms of, something one of my bosses said, he said that he always asks during an interview your parents and what they do, because he says that parents are your earlier managers, right? They're the first managers in your life for the first 18 years. And so if I were to be a fly on the wall during your upbringing, what would I have seen from your parents that I'd be able to see in you? What did you take from your dad? What did you take from your mom?
Are you guys familiar with the love languages?
Yes.
Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages?
Yeah.
So I would say for myself, words of affirmation is by far my biggest love language, both in terms of receiving and in terms of giving. And I think that really came from my parents. My parents were very verbally affirmative of me. I never felt fear of failure or fear of doing something wrong. If I wanted to play a different sport, they would figure out how they could make that happen and try it. And I was never strongly pushed in one direction or the other. And so because of that, I feel like I grew up not seeing limits and rules and bounds. I saw, all right, this is adventure, and what new can I test and try and do? And I think, my relationship with both my parents was very affirmative in what I did. I never felt heavy weight or pressure. I remember in university talking to friends that were like, oh, I'm studying engineering, but I hate it, but my parents are making me because I'm an engineer. And that was such a foreign concept to me because I was like, oh, if I told my parents I want to be a rodeo clown, they'd probably support that. They would challenge me and say like, oh, well, why do you want to do that? Have you kind of thought it through to see me build and grow in decision-making? But yeah, they were very encouraging, very verbally affirming. And I think that shapes a lot of who I am and what I do now and how I try to lead. And in relationships, I try to, I try to, but it also comes naturally. That's a much stronger love language for me than others.
Because I was listening to Gary Vee recently, and he was explaining this concept that a lot of entrepreneurs come from a place of insecurity and they're trying to prove something wrong. But I have a very close friend, and we were talking about it as well. And I should learn, some people are in fact driven by trying to prove people right because they had so much belief in them at a young age. And I definitely feel that I'm from that category because of the words of affirmation coming from your parents. Do you feel you'd come from that background or more the insecurity background as an entrepreneur?
No, definitely I would say not insecurity. I also, entrepreneurship's an interesting word because I would say I don't see myself as an entrepreneur.
Interesting.
In a way I do it, but I talk to other people that are, I would say, like perpetual hustlers, and I don't see myself like that. Growing up, I had lots of ideas like, oh, this would be cool to do, but I wouldn't have the wherewithal to follow through or continue on it. And so when I meet people often and I'm like, oh, you're more of an entrepreneur than I am. I'm in the entrepreneurial space, but I would say I don't come from that almost like chip on my shoulder, figure it out. Artesian, you asked kind of before. So Artesian is the name of the investment company that we did as a search fund and means of acquiring businesses. Yeah. And an artesian well is, do you guys know what an artesian well is?
No.
So it's a body of water that has its own pressure. So like a geyser. A geyser, no one's pumping a geyser. Or like a free-flowing hot spring. Where does that water keep coming from? Yeah. It perpetually has pressure to release itself without being man-made pumped. And so the idea behind Artesian was finding companies that have this potential. How can we say, oh, this is a good business, they have good customers, they have good employees. How can we help them be even better? How can we kind of tap into this well that already has pressure, rather than coming from like, oh, here's a problem, how can I come fix it? And so I would say fundamentally, if I had to pick one of those, I'm very much more of like, how do I take something that's running and help it do better? Which also, like as an engineer, if you told me to build you a chair, I would build a terrible chair. But if you gave me this chair and said, what's wrong with it? I could go through and say, well, I'd fix this and I would change this and I would tweak that. And so that's kind of also what led into wanting to buy a company to run entrepreneurially rather than start something. Because I'm not a start from scratch kind of guy.
I kind of want to challenge the notion of entrepreneurship. So I believe from what you mentioned, you think of entrepreneurship as starting something of your own, right? Kind of like creating your own thing, have your own ideas, and then bringing it from nothing to something. But yesterday I went to an event and they introduced the concept of systems entrepreneurship, in which you're not really creating the product yourself, but you're an entrepreneur in the sense where you're bettering something. You're providing ecosystem for these companies to thrive. So then I do kind of see you as an entrepreneur in that sense.
Well, and that's where I'd say, like, what is entrepreneurship? It's like you can look at it and slice it and say, oh, that's entrepreneurship. And then again, it's, you're saying before, like, it's kind of a buzzword, entrepreneurship.
Yeah, definitely.
But I would say, like, I don't know what it is. When you meet people and it's like, wow, like I work in an office where these guys are on their 4th business now, and another guy sees an opportunity, is like, oh, I'm thinking, even like you guys, you've created something. You've created this podcast. You brought people together. I would say that's an entrepreneurial spirit I never had. Maybe the word's not entrepreneurship. Maybe there's a better word to define that. But that's I'm running a business. I've acquired. I wear all the hats. I'm doing a lot of the things that are entrepreneurial. But from like a personality spirit type, I'm not that starter initiator looking for. When I was a kid, I wanted my weekends and evenings free, and some guys were like, "Oh, I could buy a 12-pack of Coke and sell them individually for more." And I would look and say, "Well, like those metrics are true. I have no interest in doing that." So maybe a different word, but that's
Why do you think you didn't really have an interest in that? I know you had supportive parents and kind of crafted an environment where you can pretty much be whoever you want. But what fundamentally do you think kind of stops you from pursuing that path and rather pursue something a little more corporate?
Well, I would say innately that's not who I am. Like I didn't grow up with that. I also didn't know anyone in business. My mom's a teacher. My dad worked for Fish and Wildlife and the government. My mom's family farmed. I didn't know anyone that was running a small business, operating a business. I remember when I did my undergrad, I studied engineering, looking at business students and being like, I would never do that. Like, it's like if I had worked, I took 2 years off after high school before I did my undergrad degree. Backpacked for a couple of years, worked odd jobs in restaurants and cooking and serving, and as a cowboy for a while. It did a lot of service jobs, but I kind of thought like, oh, if I wanted to figure out how to be a manager of a restaurant rather than study management, wouldn't I just work in a restaurant and start to see and work my way up? Like it's such a, you can't learn engineering from doing it. You can't be like, oh, go build a bridge. And then, oh, that was a bad bridge. You shouldn't have done that. Like there's much more mechanics to study and learn, where business I saw as like, this is so much more on the job, working with people, figuring out things. You can learn much more by doing, was my approach. Now that said, I went back and did my MBA. I studied business, but I'm super thankful I studied engineering as my undergrad and learned, I would say I'm more of a problem solver. I'm more of a problem solver, and I like to work with people to solve problems, but I don't have a lot of the first hump energy to like get things going. So I think that's why I never pursued it from the start.
That's so interesting, because I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of entrepreneurs that you see in real life are often from an engineering background. I think because of that problem-solving mindset, which I do find is so interesting. And kind of going back to when we called it a buzzword, do you have any incline as to why entrepreneurship became such a buzzword. Because even when I look at from my own perspective, it does seem that it's this almost rebellious nature. And I was talking with my boss about it as well. But if you were to guess what percentage of startup CEOs are narcissistic, do you have a guess?
I haven't spent a lot of time there's an element of me, like I was talking with some friends last night, and they talked about how I'm a rule breaker, which I would agree with. I like to challenge everything. I don't see a lot of rules and structures, bounds. When I'm biking here today, I come to a red light, I look and no one's there. I'm gonna bike through the intersection because no one's there. And so I look and say, like, that rule doesn't apply in this situation because I understand why it's there, but I don't think it applies to me in this situation. So I think from that, my vocabulary is maybe not good in terms of like what a narcissist is, but I see a lot of things and I just don't feel they apply to me. Yeah. I think to be an entrepreneur that is pushing and breaking bounds, you need to not see bounds or you won't push and break them. Henry Ford never builds something new or builds a car or really disrupts that, I guess, not the industry of horse riding, but you need to see outside the bounds. And so in a sense, I think people that are doing those don't see limits. And if the rest of society sees limits, they will see them as like, oh, this person needs to think for themselves. They don't listen to authority. Again, I see some of those in not a negative light, but
no, exactly. And that's the interesting thing. It's around 13%. The regular population is around 1%.
That are narcissists.
Yeah. And then when you go into startup CEOs, about 13% are, which is super interesting. It kind of goes to maybe the traits you need to have to almost have that hump in the beginning that you were talking about to be a CEO. But I find that a lot of the buzzword around entrepreneurship maybe sometimes comes from, being your own boss. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon how everyone wants to be an entrepreneur nowadays, I find.
Well, there's an element. You guys are also in business school, so it's much more buzzwordy.
Definitely, 100%.
I think I think it's one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, where he talks about like drug dealers, and the reason that drug dealers that live a lavish life, that whoever's at the top of the pyramid of their watches and their cars and their house and the lavish life, is really that steep pyramid is what allows the people that are grinding day to day on the street. It's that vision and allure of what if I can get there, and this is my dream to chase. And it's not that unlike like professional athletes. If statistically, if a kid grows up playing hockey in Canada, how likely is he to make the NHL or someone in the NBA or something like that? But it's the dream of like, well, what if I'm the next Wayne Gretzky? What if I'm the next like LeBron James, Steph Curry, Michael Jordan? It's that dream that has people invest unrealistic amount of hours into it. Like drug dealers should look and say like, oh, if I'm boots on the street, I'm likely going to get died, and I'm likely never going to make that. Yeah. The same as if I'm pursuing a professional athlete. The same if I'm pursuing being the next Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. There's a couple of unicorns, and we look and say like, wow, that's so sexy. I want to be the richest person in the world. Statistically, it's very hard to do. You would be much better getting like a reasonable career and working your way through, or doing something entrepreneurial. But the arena that we're in is putting entrepreneurs on the top because of that allure. What if I could get there? And so that's what leads people to do that. That's also why there's kids in Vancouver that were up at 5 a.m. practicing hockey to potentially be that next guy.
So I think it's always interesting to question entrepreneurs on why they want to be entrepreneurs, because often, I mean, especially around our age, we're 19, 20, is that it's really the glamour of being the Zuckerberg or Elon Musk that people are looking for, and not necessarily that they're coming from a place, I just want to solve problems, and I see other systems as too bureaucratic, so I just started the company. And often when you hear the entrepreneurs that are really successful, they didn't come from a background of wanting to be this big name. They just came from a place of, hey, let me try to solve this business. I know you were listening to Brian Chesky the other day, who was the CEO and co-founder of Airbnb. And something he said was that he was at Y Combinator trying to start an idea, and he was doing Airbnb on the side to try and fund his living in San Francisco. and then it ended up being what Airbnb is today. So I found that so interesting as well, how that chase that you mentioned. Do you think it's healthy ultimately?
One of my friends always likes to say that the journey is the destination.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think there's that element. I'm reading a book right now called The Purpose-Driven Life. I'm a Christian, and so my spirituality is big for me, but saying like, what is our purpose and what are we here for? And I think if our satisfaction only comes if we become the next Elon Musk, well, we look and say like, well, is he all that happy? Or even like, if our satisfaction only comes on an endpoint that's highly unlikely and unattainable, we shouldn't. That's not the right mindset. Now, I set big goals for myself. I like to push myself to grow, but there's an element of if the only reason we're getting in is to get to that destination, we're likely to end in heartbreak and misery and pain. Now, if you approach it as like, well, this would be really cool, what could I learn in this? I think that makes it very different. How could I help? How could I solve problems? Or how could I invest in people? You said you like people and coming alongside and bringing them up. If that's our focus, I think you can get to that end point, but your enjoyment of it will be very different.
Yeah.
And if you don't enjoy it, then work is much more work. If you enjoy it, it doesn't become work.
I think one of the strategies to like bolster your enjoyment of the journey is to be living in the present and have a lot of self-reflection. Do you find moments, or do you have any strategies where you like journal, write it down, meditate, stuff like that, to really focus on being present in the moment?
Yeah, I don't journal. I should, or like I do a couple of retreats a year that I'll kind of pull out my journal, but on a regular basis. I think stopping and reflecting regularly is important to kind of ground yourself. It's so easy to get just caught up in the business of life. I have 2 young kids. I'm managing a couple of companies. I'm volunteering a lot at our church. So like to pull back and stop and say, what am I doing and why am I doing it is really important. I think that's it's a like right now when we drive. You drove here this morning and you maybe have done the route enough, but you have your GPS on and you just follow what's there.
Right.
When you used to drive with the map, you would drive and stop and then you would check your map again. Am I going the right way? Is this still the route I want to go? And so I think those pauses to look and reflect are super important.
What makes you pause? Because I know a lot of the moments students at school are just like, go, go, go. And they just aim to hit one task after the other. And we don't really stop to reflect. So what prompts you to stop? Or do you have any like system set up to really make you pause and soak up the moment?
This employee I recently hired, I think he said Thursday afternoons, he keeps his calendar open and that's his like reflection time. And so he schedules it into his week. I don't know how long, it's a couple hours. I'm going to reflect, hey, am I hitting toward my big goals? How did the week go? What do I need to clean up Friday so that I can have a really good week next week? And so he physically puts it in his calendar. The busier I've gotten, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen. So I think it does require being purposeful, because if it's the important things that aren't urgent will always get thrown off the plate unless you're really purposeful with them. So I studied engineering. I went to like this little rural school. Calculus wasn't offered. I had to like get someone to send me a calculus book.
Wow.
To get into it. I knew more about like physics and math than my teacher that was teaching me. So it essentially just gave me a calculus book. I got a good score, but I didn't really learn it, I would say. Then I took 2 years off. I went into engineering. And when I started studying, I had all these kids just coming out of their high school that was like, oh, this calculus is easier than what I've done. And for me, I was like, I've never seen this before, and I've been off for 2 years. And so I remember when I started engineering, they literally on our first day said, look left, look right. One of you guys won't be here at the end of the year, because they did a forced curve and failed the bottom third of class. So with that mindset, my goal was just to hit class average. After the first year, I was above class average, and I saw, okay, I no longer need to be concerned about grades. I want to be a good engineer. And then I focused to learn more. Then like, well, what do I need to do to get the right marks? Was more like, I don't want to build a bridge that will kill someone one day. How can I learn good engineering? What's going to help me get better jobs and be better in my career? When I did that, my stress level went down and my marks went way up. Even though I was no longer concerned with marks, I was concerned with learning and education. And I would say that that's more of a general mindset, because I think you can have, as you said, you can have pauses. I'm going to set aside these hours or these days or monthly. I'm going to reflect and see where I'm going. But again, I think the more you can renew your mind and shift your mindset of what are you going after, will affect and change that.
Yeah.
If you guys are saying like, oh, I'm in school 4, 5, 6 years, I don't know how long that is with internships. I want to learn as much as I can while I'm here. I want to try these different things. I want to test these different waters.
Yeah.
I think you will enjoy much more, and you'll be going towards your goal. Where if your goal is like, I need to get high marks to get this internship, to get this job, if it's very pedestal focused, it's harder to like, some of those things aren't even in your control. We talked about who wins the championship is likely who's healthy.
Yeah.
You can't control injuries all the time. So there's things that are outside your control.
No, absolutely.
And if your enjoyment is based on those, you might end sad.
I find that so ironic because even, especially I think in business school, and I was kind of in the same boat last year, where I at least see a lot of people feeling that way. It's right, get the best grade, because if you're looking to be into investment banking, you need that 80+ average. But then what I started doing is, okay, well, when I started the podcast, I just started looking into, okay, well, what does it mean to do good marketing? And by nature, in my marketing class this semester, a lot of the things I've already read on my own. So it's really similar to your engineering. How can I build a good bridge? And I find maybe that goes to show kind of how the school is killing our innate curiosity and our innate ability to learn. But going back to your engineering days, I think engineers have always a super interesting approach to problem solving, and that's why they often become entrepreneurs or very good businessmen, is because they have this innate ability to problem solve. And often it comes from working backwards. I know it's a often principle that is given and taught in engineering. Would you echo that?
Yeah. Working backwards, I usually say structuring is big.
Or do you think, in a sense, that engineering was so fundamental in your approach to thinking nowadays? Because I often feel that engineers have this amazing framework of thinking.
As a kid, I always liked riddles and problem solving. And so I think that lent, I loved studying engineering. Working as an engineer, the jobs I had, I didn't really love the work I was doing. Now, again, maybe I could have found other jobs. But when I did engineering, I saw everything as a puzzle. And I was very linear and methodic in how I structured and how I approached it. When I started into business school, again, when I did my MBA, I signed up for everything. Like, oh, there's something going on this weekend. I'll just click sign up. I don't even know what it is. I'll figure out the morning I'm arriving. And so I started down doing management consulting case interviews. I didn't think management consulting was glamorous and sexy. I didn't know who McKinsey was. The big companies and stuff.
Of course, yeah.
But when I started down it, I was like, oh, these case interviews are just problem solving. This is like a fun riddle. Like for me, it wasn't work. It was cool. Like, okay, how do I structure right? I need to, what's profit, is revenue and costs, and how do I build it out? And so I think so those were things that were innately in me. Those were things that were developed in engineering, thinking on structures, thinking on tools, making sure you're covering bases. And so then into business, I often like when I send an email, I probably overuse bullets, right? Here's the first indent, here's the 2 sub bullets, and here's the sub bullets under there. The way I think is just very linear and structured in terms of organizing thoughts. And I think that lends well to business when it can be messy and complicated. It's about, all right, how do you distill it, and what is the simple problem, and how do we work on the simple problem?
I kind of see myself in your shoes in a bit, in which I see myself as a little more logical, a little more methodical to things, and approaches like that. I also find myself like signing up for random events and just showing up for the sake of like trying to learn something new and whatnot. And touching back on your point about like doing things just to learn, I think it takes a lot of self-awareness, and that is probably like missing amongst the student community, where a lot of the students I interact with, we're going to class to get the grades, but not quite to learn. And I think if we just had a little switch in our mindset, which we focus, oh, we're learning something, we're improving ourselves, rather than, oh, I'm showing up for like extra 1% participation marks. I think that can be very incentivizing and very intrinsically motivating. And yeah, like, is that how you find it?
There is an element of both. Like when I talk to people now, they're looking at different MBA programs. I love my time here at Sauder, and I recommend it. If people aren't looking here, I talk to them about one of the big factors I think for me is the average age of class, because I found that people that are coming in with more experience, or it's like, well, I've been in the workplace for years, I've started to build a career and I'm starting to make some good money, I'm going to step away from that to come back to school. Those people want to learn. And their approach of how they're coming is going to be different. If someone, if like, I don't know what it is now, it used to be you needed a minimum of 2-year work experience before you could do your MBA. Some programs don't have that. And I think the typical, and I would say, it was somewhat the same, I guess I just said it was a bit different, but the typical mentality when you're at your undergrad is you don't know what you want to learn. You don't know what you're stepping away from. You're still learning and dabbling. Like I have 2 young kids now. I tell them to say thank you and I tell them to say sorry, even if they're not sorry, because that's a journey of learning to be sorry. And so there is an element of like, well, sometimes like, it's like, well, what if I don't want to learn? Well, you still got to go to class and you got to write the assignments and you got to get the grades, because there is a practicality. If you fail out, you're done. And so it's almost like the hamster on the wheel and getting things going. But I think the sooner you can make that flip, again, for me, it was huge. Like I remember that first year of university, and I remember like my stress over like, oh, I failed this exam, but I was 49%. That's better. Like I at least hit my goal. I'm not bottom third. And that was like my mindset. And then later it wasn't at all. So it really helped me. And I would say I think societal, it is different now for sure than like my parents and your parents' generation of like, what is the one career you'll go to? Or people say like, oh, who's the one person you'll marry? That I think we feel pressured from so many areas on making a mistake. And I see a lot of things as learnings, less as mistakes to be made. Even now, I've had a number of careers since I did my undergrad degree. I still, things I'm doing today, think of, well, what's next for me? And how can what am I learning today? And how can I learn and build out that? How can I be the best CEO now? Well, maybe that's my goal. Maybe I'm never a CEO again. And so if I'm never going to be a CEO in 5 years and 10 years, well, then what else can I learn? How can I approach these things differently? So, yeah, I think if your goal is learning and your mindset is long, if you think like from an infinite perspective, that if I'm going to work till I'm 80, I don't know how long I live, if I make it that long and what retirement looks like and things like that. But if I'm going to work till I'm 80, I finished my MBA 5 years ago. So I'm 5 out of 50 years of working. I'm still like in grade school in like the grander point of life. And so it's like, I still have so much to learn and grow. And I think with that approach, I enjoy my work much more because it's like, oh, this is like when you're in grade 5 and you learn your first algebra equation, you don't get down on yourself. You're not like, man, I can't do multiplication. This sucks. You go, oh, I wasn't expected to know the answer before I got it, so I'll just learn. And I think if you can bring that perspective into your guys' classes, like, I don't know what I want to do with my career. That's fine. You wouldn't have put pressure on yourself if you were in grade 5, and you shouldn't put pressure on yourself now, because you're like, if you choose to take this class or not take this class, who cares? You've got a long life ahead. There's a lot of things to learn.
That's such an interesting perspective. And I think it's a perspective that you're able to have, maybe in part because you've seen a bit of the world, and I'm positive that traveling is something that's super important to you. And I wanted to pull up a photo from your time. So I know you went on exchange both to Tokyo and you went on an exchange to IE, and then you also did SSC Kenya, which is something we have in common because I'm in Lyft. It got transformed into Lyft.
Cool.
And so there's this picture that's from Sauder's website where you were talking about your experience with Lyft and Kenya. And I really just wanted to touch a bit upon your traveling experiences and how big is that? Because every time you talk to someone who, went backpacking and traveled the world, there's always, they say, oh, it's transformative or it's, super important. But coming from your perspective of, being able to come back to first principles and having different perspectives and seeing the importance of learning and what am I learning in this moment? How does traveling come into all of that?
Yeah, so I value it highly. When I was 18, but rather than going to university, I went. My parents were doing a teacher exchange in Australia, so they went and lived in a teacher's house, taught at that teacher's school. That teacher came and lived in our house, and so I flew over with them, and then I ended up backpacking for the year. Yeah, and so yeah, I'd never left Canada before I was 18.
Wow.
I've been to. I don't think I'm at 50 countries yet, but I'm at close to 50 countries that I've traveled and lived and worked in now.
How old are you now?
36.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
A lot of that was the year I lived in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Every weekend I went to a new place. So I ticked off a lot of Europe there. But I think to your question, the value of traveling, I did no internships when I was, during my summers of university, I never worked an engineering job with that corporate career path in mind. I did adventure and I explored and I tried new things. And I think it's in, like, when you're backpacking in Southeast Asia and you get robbed and you don't speak the language, there isn't a manual of here's how you do it. You got to figure it out.
That happened to you.
Yeah.
Do you want to share that story quickly? Seems interesting.
Oh, it's not that sexy.
I just got robbed and that's about it.
It was my birthday and I was on an overnight bus from Bangkok to Chiang Mai. And they woke us up to, like, get us off the bus to refuel. And I had been super paranoid, like, keeping my passport and my camera, like, everything on me.
Yeah,
I'd walk around with things, like, with a bag on my chest. And I kind of groggily got up and started walking off the bus. And then I was like, oh, I didn't bring my bag. But it was 2 a.m. at some random gas station. And I asked them, like, oh, are you going to lock the bus when we're on? And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll lock the bus. And then hours later, I looked and it was my camera. Fortunately, they didn't take my passport or my cash, because I had lost my credit card right before I went to Thailand, so I just had all cash with me.
Wow. If
those things if they would have taken my full bag, I would have been, I might not be here, or it'd be different.
No, thanks for sharing that. But yeah,
so traveling, I feel like you have to experience. You're pushed to experience so many new things, and even right now in business, I say, all right, here's your job description, here's what you'll do. That's really just a framework, because tomorrow something will come up that wasn't written down. And it's like, how can people figure out what to do? So when I'm interviewing people or hiring people and I see that, oh, they've lived in different places, they've worked in different cultures, they've figured out those dynamics and they've been able to navigate them, to me, that's so much more valuable than, like, oh, I see you've done a very, like, a corporate thing. They're like, oh, yeah, you did your CPA at KPMG. Now, I know that there's a lot of academic rigor there, but to me, to see, like, oh, you've never done that, but you've traveled through Nepal for 6 months, that person has learned a ton of life skills. And so I enjoy those things, but I also value that in people in terms of what it forces you to do, to be creative, to be collaborative, to problem solve. Yeah, there's no manuals for those things.
Yeah, I'm actually facing a dilemma between working and traveling this summer.
Pick travel. Don't worry. And you'll work for, and also, like, you work for the rest of your life. Like, I've got young kids now. Are we going to integrate travel into our lifestyle? For sure. But it's like,
I feel like work is something really ingrained in this business school, at least, because it's like, oh, you got to build up your experiences. You got to, like, go to these companies. So after your 4 years or so, you can land, like, nice job and climb the corporate ladder. I understand that traveling is going to be limited in the future, but I also feel this stress, like, behind me of, what if I stop for 4 months and travel, like, how can I leverage it to, like, my future employer, or would they even consider me and whatnot? Did you ever kind of face that stress?
I'll have to give you context, because what Brandon's feeling is what most students are feeling, especially we're in second year. And second year, for context, is that period where if you get an internship, there's so much validation that would come from your peers from getting an internship in second year, that I think that's why people struggle with it so much. And something to your notion before you kind of answer his question is this concept of being behind that I find so interesting. That even though you'd learn and experience so much by traveling, there's this notion that no, I can't take 4 months off or I'm going to be behind, which I find so interesting.
Yeah. So first off, I would say that again, it's not you, and it's also not new. When I was doing my engineering undergrad, most of my engineering peers were saying, "Oh, I need to get a good internship so that I could get a good job and really focus on that now."
Yeah.
I ended up with a great job coming out of my engineering degree, and my internship in Switzerland was nothing related. I was maybe fortunate and lucky that it came out, but once I'm in my first job, well, who cares? And I had much more fun in my summers and experiences. Again, like even grades, like there's an element of like what you learn in grades and what tactile skills you get. Now maybe grades help you get a better job, but if you've got better grades just because you've figured out how to game the system, but I'm a bad engineer, I'm not going to get promoted in the company. Maybe I got my job, but I'm going to get fired from that company, versus like, what are the other things I can learn and grow? And again, I think in terms of context and longevity, I don't know your background and your family, and it's like, if you need money now, well, you need money now. And I was fortunate. I just took out loans. I ran out a ton of student debt, and then I finished my degree and got a good job, and I focused on paying it down and paid off all my debt. So there is context. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Not everyone has the luxury of being able to travel, but I think it's you've got such a long time. Like it's you would look at a kid in grade school, and it's like, why is that kid not playing in recess? Why are they practicing their spelling? And saying like, just go play. You are still that kid. It's like you are still in that context. And so many things as well. Like if you get the right internship, well, do you get the right job? And maybe or maybe not. If you learn to develop good social skills and good people skills, and then you meet someone and reach out, or you interview someone on this podcast and you're able to relate to them because you've traveled and they work at a company that you want, well, just as easily that could help you get in and down those roads. You guys reached out and talked to me because you saw some of my background in the travel I did. Well, I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't have done those things. So I would say I wouldn't see it as career limiting at all necessarily. And I for sure would see it as life engaging more. Like you're you as a worker, but before that you're you as a person. And that's also like if I was putting in 8-hour weeks now, would my business be more successful? Yes. Would my family be more successful? No. And I'm a me first. So I need to think of like, what's my overall goal in life? Career is one of those elements. But even that, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, say you travel to a country, you see a new way of doing business, you see a new way of processing things. Think of that as research for what you're doing back here. You see new way of conversations, how they communicate in different cultures is very different. So yeah, I highly encourage. Again, I'm a small sample size.
Yeah,
it didn't hinder my career taking time off and traveling.
But if I played devil's advocate and I said, "Oh, but Ben, all my friends are gonna look down on me, and I'm not gonna be in the same position as them," what would you say?
Misery loves company. And so like, how many of your friends are actually going to be like, "Oh, Adam, I had such a better summer really grinding this while you were backpacking in Patagonia." Like, yeah, no, if your validation is status, to say like, okay, well, again, like where is your goal? Where is your purpose and satisfaction? If it's being highly looked upon by your colleagues, well, again, are you talking today or are you talking long term? When I run a business, I make decisions. What's long term best for us? I don't want to be a short term investor. I want to say what's going to help this company in 20 years, and I want to make that decision. And so you could, even if what you say you value is social elevation, I want to be on top of my pyramid of my friend group. Well, do you care about that more today or in the future? Because if you care about it in the future, well, you might be better off being ridiculed now, but you're gaining and growing an experience to come back and like, oh, I'm the first millionaire of my friends. Yeah. Because I've been able to learn these skills and build something. You will be. Now, this is also, I would say, I'm a jack of all trades. I've never doubled down and really focused. I've never taken the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. I want to be the best accountant I can be. This will help me be successful. So all I'm going to do is accounting. If that's what you want to do, well, then you need the hours and you need the reps. I've looked and said, like, I see myself as working with people, working strategically. And so having more overview and experience is a value. So it was better for me to be the best CEO now that I took the time off and traveled. That was part of adding to my toolkit to do what I need to do. And so if getting the internship at the corporation is the best thing that is part of your path and goal, well, then maybe that's the best for you.
Yeah.
If that's not what you really want and you're just doing it to appease your friends, again, it goes back to like, why do you want to do what you're doing?
Yeah. That's interesting. And I read it in Mark Manson's book. I don't know. Have you ever read any of his work? He's the author of Subtle Art, Not Giving a Fuck, and then later Everything is Fucked as well. Great author. But in his latest book, he talks about this difference between a teenager and an adult. And he says, essentially, teenagers go from means to an end. So everything they do is for some great purpose. So I want to get this internship because it's going to give me the validation. I'm going to give you a gift because then you're going to think I'm a good friend and it's going to do something else. But he says the difference is when you become an adult is when it becomes the end. The pursuit is the end. And so it's, I'm going to go traveling because I value learning other cultures, right? I'm going to raise a family because I simply value family, not because I want to have the perception of being a good father or something like that. And he said, so that's the difference between being a teenager and being an adult. And I think to echo kind of your point of that future sight, I like to call it amongst my friends, is I think a lot of people just like that ability to, this is how it feels right now. What does that decision look 10 years down the line? I think that's often this pursuit of consumerism as well. It's people don't take 5 seconds to imagine themselves being in the Ferrari and understanding what it feels in the first 5 minutes, and the first month, and the first 5 months, and then the year. And if you just go through that process, you probably quickly realize that after a year, it just becomes a car like anything else. And so what are you really pursuing? Would you kind of echo that point with your future sight?
So I don't know if I would agree that adults grow out of that mindset.
Yeah.
Like a lot of adults are like, oh,
absolutely. And I think a lot of adults stay teenagers in some ways.
It really just continues because so much of, it's where do we find our value and validation? And a lot of it is through others and through things that we're pursuing. You look at the richest people in the world and it's like, are they the happiest people in the world? I don't know. Maybe they are, but it's like of the Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all recently have gone through divorces, are estranged from their children. If we looked and said, is this happiness and wholeness? Oh, again, I can't speak into all the context of their situations, but I think how many people would say, oh, I want to be those guys, but then seeing like, well, what do we actually want to be those guys, and what actually comes? But at all the levels, if we don't know what we find our satisfaction in, we're always chasing pieces, and those are always fleeting. Like no one is rich enough. Like Mark Zuckerberg is up at night thinking, how can I'm throwing these people out there that could be great people. I don't know what they're thinking, but someone at the top of the corporate ladder is thinking, how much more can I get? Because more is never enough. It's always, if you're chasing something, that target keeps moving and your satisfaction is never earned or attained. Again, not to go on a long preach, but like our church just went through a series on grace and how like the gift of salvation in Jesus is freely given to us. And because it's freely given, we don't have to do anything. And I don't, which is hard because as humans, like you said, it's like, well, I should give a gift because I want something back. Or if someone gives me a compliment, I better give them a compliment because like there's that reciprocity. I feel like I feel freedom that I don't walk under the weight and burden of performance. I don't need to please anyone. I don't need to please God. I don't need to please my wife. I can walk in freedom without that. And almost like me as a student searching for grades, I do better without that because I'm not looking to please or find validation in someone else. So again, but it's definitely, it's not just teenagers. It's not just college age kids, all the way through adults. The reason that there's social media is to present an image to get validation from others. I know a lot of people that go on vacations just to get the Instagram pictures so they can show their friends. I went on this miserable vacation that I hated and I had to save up for, but I did it. No, they're probably not saying that, but there is that element of like pursuit and chase.
Understand.
I kind of want to touch on the topic of finance a little, because I know you have, like, you raised, you acquired your own company and whatnot, and since first year, I'm in my second year, kind of got into the loop of thinking I want to pursue finance, and I joined a few clubs. Within those clubs, there's these like really ambitious people who are just pursuing internships, grinding out, trying to get the best possible position. I don't quite see myself at the very peak of it, but I still feel like I'm in the loop of where I kind of need those experiences to get to where I want. And I know you took your summers off, you really pursued your own thing, and you were also an engineer in your undergrad. Like, what do you think the investors saw in you, or how were you able to convince the investors to give you the money?
Yeah, good question. And I would say, like, I've had a fairly fortunate path. The investors that I'm working with was more of a personal friendship connection, family friends. I met up for dinner. Kind of over the course of dinner, I got in our car with my wife, drove away, and I was like, oh, I think they're offered me a job to kind of go into what I'm doing. So I didn't come with a pitch deck to kind of show this is who I am and what I can do. Right. So maybe I would say maybe I didn't have those tactile skills really kind of on resume and paper. Mm-hmm. That said, I've operated most of my life that way. Like I haven't done things to say like, oh, this will look good on my resume. I've done it to learn and enjoy, and I have been able to get here. So whether it's fortunate or whether those things have built in. I'd led a Bible study in our church, and someone had come to that and had seen my leadership and ability based out of that, and that's what gave them the trust in me. Wow. So I wasn't doing that to put it on my resume.
Of course not, yeah.
But it's like, oh, like maybe you're traveling and you'll meet someone, like because we're full people, there's other things that add up. Now there is some elements, like there's very tactile skills you need if you want to go into finance, and how do you learn and dabble of what that looks like. There's certifications. You get your CFA, and that shows a certain level of understanding and excellence. It's a tough certification to get. I was talking to Adam beforehand that when I did my engineering internship, I did research and development. Wasn't the area I thought I wanted to go. I affirmed that through doing it. But internships, when you do them, and again, I shouldn't say never always travel and never do internships.
Yeah.
But there is a balance of like test the waters in different things. At least that's my approach. My approach wasn't head down, double down, but bring a fullness of different things. But again, I think there's the pressure of being in school and in the clubs is you feel that the only way to get a job in finance is to be a part of this club and to do this and to do that.
Definitely.
This is the single step to get there. That's not the case for sure. You could get a job working in finance through many and multitude of ways. One of the employees I have now, I met her through an SSE Kenya program. She had done that internship. She reached out to me when I was starting. I didn't work with her then, but when I was working at Artesian and searching, she reached out to me. I had that relationship and connection, and now she's getting an awesome opportunity doing financial things and doing acquisition things on the M&I side that she likely wouldn't have got if she went through a corporate process. But because of those external activities, made the connection in the relationship and is now getting the opportunities.
Yeah, I think you're such a fresh air, and for the students listening, and even for me, I think that breath of fresh air of just having that perspective that there is other ways. You just have to kind of almost look for those other ways, pause, and see if there is other ways. And it comes down to, I guess, that marrow of thinking when you're in a group of people that all think the same way and you all see the same vision. Kind of transitioning into your most recent chapter of CEO of Safe Sidewalks, it was very interesting because I would have never grown up thinking, hey, I'm going to start a company or acquire a company and then try to fix sidewalks. I find that's quite niche. How did that whole story come about?
Yeah. So when I started Artesian, we were looking to acquire a small to medium business. I spent about a year and a half through that time.
Wow.
So look, I wasn't good at keeping my stats. A lot of searchers are, but how many thousands of companies I looked at a high level, getting into more detail, breaking down. And so it was actually right as COVID was hitting. We were in detailed talks with Safe Sidewalks as well as another business. And kind of we're like, what do we do? What's going to happen with COVID? Should we pull back? The investors I work with, they're Christian as well. Part of our kind of mandate at Artesian was to grow capital for the purpose of giving. We didn't originally structure Artesian as a foundation. We looked at it. Foundations can't have majority interest in businesses. And so we said, hey, we're planning on taking money, building and acquiring and growing it, and then turning the taps and giving. Given what's COVID right now and there's humanitarian crisis around the world, should we shift that focus now? Looked at some avenues, decided not to, looked at Safe Sidewalks and said, hey, I found it through a broker, through some deal flow.
Yeah.
But it was like, people are going to keep walking during COVID. If anything, that's all you could really do for a while. If someone doesn't walk today, it's not like that potential value goes away. If an airplane flies empty, that's money lost you never get back. If someone doesn't repair a sidewalk today because they don't have a budget, that sidewalk is still there to be repaired. And so I saw it as a very stable business to go through coming into what could be a recession or what could happen. There's a lot of unknowns. Like the business from a lot of standpoints, like that it was doing real good. When I learned about it, I was like, oh, why wouldn't every city in Canada be doing this? This makes sense. It's so much cheaper. It's so much more convenient than tearing out sidewalk and replacing it. So yeah, it was just an attractive business. I'd looked at a lot of businesses and it ticked the boxes for a lot of things.
And what ended up you becoming specifically CEO? Because, you could have acquired the business and put someone else in that place and maybe be more of a chairman role where you just oversee it. Why specifically CEO and being involved with the day-to-day operations?
Well, that was also partially my mandate coming out. So in business school, when I did my MBA, I focused in entrepreneurship. Again, not as a natural entrepreneur with that skill, but I liked wearing all the hats. I liked leading people. I liked teams. I liked dabbling and being a jack of all trades. And so I was attracted to entrepreneurship and the idea of running a business. I kind of thought if I meet someone, like you guys seem to have a cool little dynamic and partnership. If I meet someone, I would gladly go along and work with them, but I don't have that driver idea. So maybe I'm employee 2, 3, or 4, but I'm probably not employee number 1. From there, I got pulled into management consulting, and I was like, wow, this is hard problem solving, coming in and fixing things and working with teams of smart people to fix things. And I was interested in that. We had done some consulting projects, and I would see old consultant reports. Here's a 50-page report that we've read once and don't know what to do with. And that was a common theme, that in consulting, you're giving a pitch deck or slide of recommendations, but there isn't a lot of follow through. And I was like, well, that doesn't, like my first idea probably is not my best idea. And the implementation of it is really the challenge. Absolutely. And so then I was looking at more internal consulting. Maybe you have more continuity. When I came across entrepreneurship through acquisition as a field of like, oh, rather than tell someone else how you should run their business, buy it and own it. And then you're making your decisions and you're not having to convince someone, you're just doing it that way. And so my intent all along was to be an operator. I was looking for a business, and that was part of it. I was looking for a business that I could come in and be involved, lead the team, have the boots on the ground, think of what to do, then implement and try to do it. So from the start, that's what I was looking for. A business I could go in and be hands-on as CEO or president and really work. That said, it's tough. Running a business is really challenging. I've really enjoyed, in the other company that we've acquired that I operate from a board level, more of a chairman type role, I've really enjoyed that. The guy that's running that business, so they're the owner, completely sold. The guy that was kind of leading sales, he transitioned into president of the company. And he had commented a couple, maybe last year, I feel like I've learned my MBA this year. And that for me added a lot of value of like, I've been able to communicate things in terms of structuring and helping them grow and improve. So I've learned a lot in operating, even though it hasn't been the most enjoyable. It was more enjoyable this past year because my mindset changed to more of like, what can I see in learning? So a mix of both. I think doing the dirty work is important to learn it. I've also really enjoyed from a board level and being a bit more strategic.
And I have to ask you because I see myself taking a bit more of a president slash CEO role, not that we're incorporated yet as Coding Life, but something I try to do is implement leadership principles. And as I'm reading all these biographies from all these famous entrepreneurs, they each seem to have a set of leadership principles that they abide by. If you had a top 3, what would they be, or a top 2?
Cool. Well, like our one of the things I did at Safe Sidewalks was somewhat formalize our company values. Our company values
Exactly. So what would those values be? Yeah.
Entrepreneurial ambition and drive, honest feedback, internal and external. So what are we telling the customer? Do we actually believe that? And are we telling each other things that we believe? Enjoy helping others, pride and precision in your work, and making wow happen. And so I would see those like I'm still working on how do we ingrain these more. How are we hiring people based off these? How are we rewarding them based off these? How are we really saying if someone has these attributes, they're our people, no matter what role they are. Are they a technician repairing the sidewalk? Are they in a bookkeeping, running the numbers? Or are they being a manager and what their role is? And so I think if I had to think of like what my leadership things are, those reflected the company that I saw.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they also reflected things in me. I like I said, with where I see value in traveling, I like people that take initiative. I like people that are willing to tackle problems. I like people that want to work collaboratively in groups on things.
Because something I've been struggling with, Ben, is the battle between culture almost and product, and where should I be putting my time in? And from reading books from various entrepreneurs or just talking to entrepreneurs, it seems to be two-sided, completely split down the middle, 50-50. So I guess there's no necessarily right answer, but I'm just looking, what do you believe is preferable? Do you have a company without culture but a good product, or vice versa? And so essentially what I'm asking is that, do you rather spend more time on perfecting your product, or do you rather spend more time perfecting the culture? Because do you think that without a culture, you don't have a company? I just find myself constantly battling between these two and how to allocate my time.
So I was at a conference last January, and the speaker made a comment that if business was as easy as sending a well-written email and everyone did what you did, business would be really easy. and I nodded my head and resonated that. I think leadership, you can't, I remember, again, being like an engineer, I had a very linear process. You can only be a leader if you have people following you. You can't be a solo leader. Yeah. So leader requires people. People requires relationships. Relationships require interaction, and culture is what governs those. And so to be a good leader, I think that focus on people needs to be there without a doubt. You can have a really great product, but people that don't believe in it or don't believe in you or don't want to do the work, and it won't go anywhere. Yeah. And like I think the other thing sexy in business school is like with entrepreneurship is the idea. What is the idea? If only I would have thought of Airbnb. No, like there was probably tons of people that thought of the same idea. The real challenge in everything is execution. By far. Like, wow, Uber, that was a great idea. That was a great idea. But like if you didn't execute it right, it wouldn't happen. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of focus in business school on the next big idea. How can we help you discover this idea? An idea without a team of people to execute on it is completely useless. A team of people that can execute on things that are flexible, well, they can find ideas and they can navigate different pathways. One of my professors in Madrid, he had written a book that I really liked. It's called something like the myth of the idea, the upside down startup. Okay. Yeah. And the idea behind that is more so almost going back to like looking to be entrepreneurial. So to say like, if you want to start a business, what space and sphere do you know? And do you have relationships and do you have interactions? And if like, let's say I have no connection in mining, but I have a mining startup idea. It's going to take a lot of time to build that network and to break in and to figure out the nuances and figure out the people and build a reputation versus like, if I'm a professional athlete and I want to move into the athletic realm of marketing, I already have connections. I have authenticity. There's so many things that I bring. So if he kind of says, rather than start with an idea, start with your network and your people and your sphere of influence. Know and understand that. What are the resources and people at your disposal?
Mm-hmm.
Now, within that, like looking for the idea should almost be the last thing. Because if you find a good idea, but it's on an island, well, that's not useful. But if you start with what can I actually do, who are the people and what's my ability, then you can build from there. But I guess back to your question, I think a good product without people to sell it and market it and build it isn't a good product.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ben, as a tradition on this podcast, the final question we want to ask you is to get your thoughts on a quote left by a previous guest. And this guest actually traveled, I believe, for a year.
Yeah.
All across the world right after they graduated. So similar experiences. And the quote goes, "There's only two tragedies in life. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it." What are your thoughts?
Interesting. I guess like it's meant to be thought provoking.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the idea of getting it is somewhat of a finite item.
Right.
Like whether they created that quote or someone else, the idea like, oh, I say your goal is to be a CEO.
Yeah.
And now that I'm a CEO, then what? Is like the question.
Yeah.
And so I think if your goal is finite, well, if you don't get it, you're going to be upset. And if you get it, well, you're now going to be confused because you're going to find it wasn't as sexy as I thought it was. So yeah, I think if you're destination focused, I think that very much is true. Again, are the richest people in the world that, hey, I want to be the richest person in the world. Are they happy now that they've got it? Well, maybe not. It maybe is like a tragedy in a sense.
It's so interesting because if you look at depression rates amongst Olympic athletes, the moment they get their gold medal, it's astonishing. It's around the 40% mark. And it's really this notion that they've been chasing something this whole time, and then it's then what? And athletes get it all the time. And I think if people had just taken that moment before to think, oh, it's actually about the journey, as we echoed through the conversation, I think people would be more in tune with what they really want to do. Thank you so much, Ben, for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.